Hi everyone, my name is Essen and you're listening to the Brown History Podcast. When we think of Goa, we usually think of beach parties, vacation, or that movie Dil Chahta Hai. But Goa was once the headquarters of the Portuguese Empire in the east for 450 years. They were the first colonial powers to come to the subcontinent and they were the last to leave. The Portuguese brought a different face of Christianity to the subcontinent and they used it to impose their rule over Goa. They planned for Goa to be the Rome of the East, and that took violence, torture, and erasure. We sit with Ângela Barreto Xavier, author of the book Religion and Empire in Portuguese India, and discuss the transformation of Goa during the first couple of centuries of Portuguese colonial rule. It's a fascinating episode, and if you're enjoying the podcast and you're enjoying the Instagram page, please do support us. All you have to do is become a patron. Just visit brownhistorypodcast.com. Your help goes a long way. It tells me that I'm doing a good job and that there is love for it, and that is a motivation in its own. So thank you so much for listening, and let's get this started. As far as I knew about Goa, I knew that there was a Portuguese conquest there, and I understood that Catholic religion was prevalent in that region. But I guess the Goa that we all talk about and think about now is a party place, beaches, a fun place to go to. So it's surprising to know that it has this kind of really dark history and not really talked about. So I was curious to know if today in Goa, do people of Goa have conversations of colonialism and the history, the violent and dark history, or is it kind of like not talked about anymore and people just kind of live their lives?
So no, yes, there are the two things are happening today, which is interesting. The other day I was traveling in the new Goan airport, and the new Goan airport, the decoration is almost all referring to the colonial period and the Portuguese presence and the influence in Goan architecture, for example. And I was really shocked with that because it's like this the traces of this colonial past, which are very evident in especially in the central territories of Goa, now became like a coin for attracting tourists, like this mix between India and Europe and so on. That is something that at the same time is really a point of big criticism. So you have like an academic discourse and also public discourse that is very much against colonialism, but the same public sphere uses colonialism or the traces of colonialism to sell Goa as a tourist attraction. So,
and it's working.
And it is working. And it is
Wow.
working very well.
But people who grew up in Goa and were raised in Goa, do they question their identity?
Yes, because there are many Goas, in my view. There is not only one
Right.
Goa. There are many Goas because the territories that constitute the state of Goa of today have been conquered or annexed by the Portuguese in different periods. So not all the territories were part of Portuguese Goa at the same time. There are three territories that are very central, which are from the 16th century until the 1961. And the majority of Goa, of the territory of Goa, even if demographically it's not majority because these central territories are the most populated or were the most populated, they have been annexed or conquered only after the second half of the 18th century. Yes. So while in these central territories Christianity was imposed from the beginning, in the second territories there was a change in the political culture in the Portuguese Empire. So there was not the imposition of Christianity anymore. Right. So you can see that the people that belong to these other parts, they don't have the same connection to Western values or in Western cultural values, at least, even if institutionally, yes, as the people of the central parts. So for ones and the others, the way they think about their own identity is quite different. Of course, besides the fact that some are Catholics and others are Hindus or Muslims and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, you have many discussions, but they are different discussions depending on the parts of the people, from where people come from, or their education, or the fact that their ancestors have fled away from Goa in the 16th century. You still have people that are very much attached to Portugal today, even today.
Before we get more into current times, for people who don't know the historical context of Portuguese Goa, we should start from the beginning. And I wanted to know what Goa was like before the Portuguese came.
I have the thesis that there was no Goa before the Portuguese came.
All right, true. The region that was there where the Portuguese came and conquered.
Yes. Okay, but it's important that I just say why I have this thesis.
Yes.
Because this region were never unified under the same political empire, because it was always submitted to different empires for such a long period, like 500 years. Not all, but this just much before. Let's put it that way. Like with the Kadambas very earlier, these territories were under the same political regime, but since the 10th century onwards, it was disputed by different empires. So
it was different kingdoms, basically.
Yes, kingdoms and empires,
right.
Actually. So this means that these regions, they were very complex, and they had different historical biographies, I must say. I can put it like that. Mm-hmm. So also because of different migrations since the very early periods. And this multi-layered, these were kind of multi-layered societies, not only one community, not only one identity, even if they shared some aspects, and they did, but they also did not share many other aspects, and that you can see, for example, in the deities that existed in different parts of this region at the time of the arrival of the Portuguese. Mm-hmm. You have in these central regions. Now I'm thinking about the central regions. In the southern part, you had the main male deity was from Sanskritic origin, when I might say like that, while in the northern regions, it was not from a Sanskritic origin. So, and that can show you that the rhythms of Romanization or Sanskritization of these regions were not exactly the same at the time of the arrival of the Portuguese. The other thing is also related to what we usually call system of case system, that also operated differently in different places of this region. I would say even connected to that, the land regime of these different regions were also not equal. So you see, you can see only by these three factors, I could enumerate others, that diversity was one of the features that characterized these different regions that we call today Goa.
Wow. So then the Portuguese came, and how did the colonization of that region take place during the 16th and 17th century?
Well, badly, violently.
Yeah, violently.
Violently. Well, it was first. It was a conquest in 1510 by Afonso de Albuquerque and his troops, allied to a local ruler, Timorra, or Timaya, depends on who writes his name, and also with local allies, because that's something we really have to understand. The previous domination of these territories was the Bijapuri Sultanate, and it had been there only for 30-40 years, not more than that. And before that, it was the Bahmanid Sultanate, and then before that, it was Vijayanagara Empire. So in the 15th century, you had three different dominations of Goa. So the local elites, I would say, had, at least in their memory, the memory of their ancestors, this understanding that there was a volatile thing. The external dominations were not always the same, you know. So when the Portuguese, I even argue that many of them had a kind of culture of negotiation, because they knew that they could change dominion if
they wanted to.
Well, that would look very nice, but not exactly like that. But since they were weak on one hand, they could also give their services to another ruler that could offer them better conditions, or at least they believed that could offer them better conditions that the ruler they had already. No, so that was how the conquer of Goa somehow happened in 1510, which was a very violent conquest. It was not nice at all, especially it was extremely violent for the Muslim people living in Goa at that moment. They were apparently almost all killed or expelled, and really an awful thing. But the locals that were not Muslim, they were granted a kind of contract that initially was supposed to protect their rights and even not expand their taxes or even lower the tributes they had to pay to the Portuguese. So it was a conquest, but it looked like, at least for the local elites, as a not so bad thing in the end, you know.
Okay.
But this initial move changed dramatically in the 1530s, 40s. The same is to say, while in the beginning the Portuguese were not imposing conversion, because it was not the main issue, in contrast with what some people defend. In the beginning, it was not the main issue. The main issue was trade, definitely. Trade, spices. This was really the main issue.
The main goal to colonize that area was trade. That's what you're saying.
Yes, exactly. Because there was this more general plan, and Goa was part of this more general plan that was to control some key ports, not only in India, but also in the Gulf, or in the Arabian Sea, and also Malacca. And that was the main idea, was to control ports, to have the control also on the spices flow, you know. And that was working not so badly in the beginning, this plan. But you know, we have to think about the political culture of the colonizers also, because sometimes I was trying to do that in my book, it's a very political book in that sense. First thing I was trying to do was to understand which was the political culture of the people that were living in Goa in that period, but also of the colonizers, which were the political imagination of these two different sets of people.
Yeah.
And the political imagination of the Portuguese rulers, and again, the Portuguese are also not all equal, but of the Portuguese rulers, changed dramatically after 1521, in the decade of 1530s, I must say. Not only in Portugal, but also in all Europe. And that is very much related to a religious issue, which is the separation between Catholics and Protestants that happens in this period.
Right.
So the papacy in Rome doesn't control anymore all Europe as before in religious terms. And that creates a need to expand Catholic religion. So the fragmentation, the religious fragmentation of Europe leads to the expanding of this need of expanding Catholic religion.
Wow.
And this is parallel to the beginning of the Portuguese and the Spanish empires. And it's not by chance in that sense that you have like South America and Central America, South America, as well places in Asia where the Portuguese, because it's the same chronology, being converted to Christianity, systematically converted to Christianity. And then since that moment onwards, violence, and namely cultural violence, started very intensively in these different places, both in the Spanish Empire and in the Portuguese Empire.
Wow. So all of a sudden they went from wanting money and power in the trade spice to we need to convert people to Christianity and we need to spread the word of God.
Not exactly. That would be very. I mean, that was a goal, a genuine goal to spread the word of God, but it was not exactly. Not only that. That was converging with this idea that you can only conserve the territories, like political conservation. It became dependent on the faith of the vassals of a king. So there was this belief, So if you were ruling people that had different creeds, then conservation would become much more difficult. Political conservation would become much more difficult. And that was not the previous experience in the Portuguese Empire. Or not in the Portuguese Empire, in the Portuguese kingdom. For example, in the medieval period, you had like Muslim and Jewish people living in the Portuguese kingdom, and it was not. There were lots of conflicts. They were subalterns and all that, but this was possible as a political arrangement. By the end of the 15th century onwards, this starts to change. Like the Jewish people in Portugal are obliged to convert to Christianity. The Muslim people in Portugal are obliged to convert to Christianity. And then 30 years later, with this separation of Protestants and Catholics, this move becomes even more crucial to guarantee political conservation. So it's not only the spread of the word of God, it is the alliance of this will of spreading the word of God with a political need of conserving territories.
Conserving territories, you mean like taking the land, like obtaining land and owning it?
It's more than that. Also, in the political culture of that period, what was really important was not only taking the land, but the number of people you are ruling over.
So it's like a deeper way of colonizing someone is by using through the word of God, in a sense.
Oh, definitely.
Okay. I see.
Definitely. Like for example, missionaries were writing about this and telling the Portuguese king or other authorities that the first converted people would not be real Christians, but second and third generations would become real, genuine Christians. And if they would become genuine Christians, they were even using these words. They would become the best soldiers for your majesty.
Wow. That's crazy.
It's crazy. But there is also another variable that I didn't refer, which is that Portuguese kingdom had more or less 1 million people in that period. So it was a very small kingdom. And to send people abroad to colonize was not easy, obviously.
No.
So the number of colonizers was relatively scarce. So there was also this. So if we don't have real allies locally, we cannot do it. I'm putting this in easy words, but
I understand.
But how to make allies, real allies, genuine allies, by converting them to Christianity, by making them like Westerners in a way, if it was possible. It was not possible, but there was the belief that they could do it. So this was an important, and conserving the territories was essential for trade. So you see, something that was in the beginning was more about trade, then it becomes to trade to persist. In a way, you have to have a demographic basis that is very solid locally. But to this demographic basis to be very solid, then you have to convert people to Christianity. The question was a bit more or less like this. It's more complex, obviously, but it was a bit more like this.
So now the goal is to convert everybody, and the Portuguese are controlling this region with people who have their own religion, their own traditions, their own languages, their own way of life. How did the Portuguese convert people into Christianity?
Okay, so I use the concept of cultural conversion more than religious conversion because first of all, I don't believe that the Portuguese converted local people religiously speaking.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the beginning, they believed that they could do it, but out of ignorance, because they didn't know anything about the local religions, devotions, and how they operated, and they also didn't know anything about, how to put it, cognitive processes and logical processes and epistemological processes in early modern India. What do I mean by this? It's in the Western world, and I don't want to say that India was structurally different. No, India, as you know, probably better than myself, had several philosophical schools and several ways of organizing reality in a way. Mm-hmm. But Portuguese were unaware of this. And in the Portuguese world, the philosophical tradition was mainly of Greco and Roman origins, Greek origins mainly. And so the way of all Greek Latin languages were organized was a binary way, you know? And when I mean binary was, you can be this or you are that, but you cannot be both at the same time. So you are either one or two. You cannot be one and two. And why I'm bringing this to the equation? Because the local people that inhabited the region of Goa didn't share necessarily the same principles, the binary principles of the Portuguese.
Right.
So they could be devoted to their own deities and Christians at the same time.
Wow. I see what you mean. They're progressive like that, I guess, in the sense.
Yeah, in the sense also that was cumulative. It was a cumulative way of thinking about religion. While in the Portuguese case, either you could be this or that. Either you were Christian or you were not Christian. So in the missionaries, again, they faced this puzzle because they were saying, well, these local people, they don't understand what is the contrary of something. Okay. Because they were not understanding what was the logical system operating locally, you know? So in that sense, we cannot speak about religious conversion because when we speak and we think about religious conversion, we think more about a closed system, a closed religion, like Islam towards Christianity or vice versa, but not to an open religion system as it was, well, what we could call Hinduism at that period, but I don't know if I could. Well, I don't use this category to the 16th and 17th centuries. You cannot convert from Hinduism to Christianity. In that sense, in that period, you cannot, definitely. So there was a nominal conversion to Christianity. And then what I try to explain in my work is that what really happened was a cultural conversion. And that happened through different ways. But the two main ways of doing it was educating people in Christianity and Portuguese language from the beginning, from the early childhood. That's why they were saying, first generation, they will not be truly Christians, but the second and the third they will. Because they were aware of that. Well, from a certain moment onwards, like in 30 years, missionaries realized they knew more about the locals, so they realized that
they're a lost cause.
really, that was a religious conversion. That was a nominal conversion, it's not a true conversion. So you would not convert, you would educate people in a certain way. Like myself, I was brought up as a Catholic, but I didn't convert to anything. I was brought up as a Catholic because I was educated as a Catholic from the beginning, and also I learned the Portuguese language since the beginning, and which means that the way I was thinking about many things, like this binary system I was referring to, was very much westernized or Europeized, if I can say this word. So much more connected to the way our logical systems operated and operate in Europe. So that's why I'm speaking about cultural conversion, and how did the Portuguese did it? Again, through violence, legal violence.
Legal violence?
Yes, because they were arranging a set of discriminatory laws against the people that did not convert.
Okay, so they established laws where they're allowed to be violent if they don't convert.
But no, it's not even allow them to be violent. It's like, if you don't convert and you cannot hold positions, offices over people that convert. Right. Non-Christians cannot rule Christians. That was a very old axiom in Catholic Church. Non-Christians cannot rule over Christians. So all the locals that have ruling positions, even the villages, local elites, and so on, they would lose their power from the moment onwards that their subalterns or unprivileged people converted to Christianity. They could not rule over the converted people. So you can see how disrupting this could be for the system, for the systems operating locally. The economy of power would be completely dismantled this way.
Can you describe the violence that occurred? How bad was it?
Okay, so you have this type of violence I was referring to you. For example, if in Goa, you the first to convert are not the privileged people, but the unprivileged people. So, and now I'm speaking about cultural violence more than other. So, unprivileged people were given lands, for example, and they were told by the missionaries they didn't need to perform ritual services to privileged people. So privileged people could lose their status, their social status, because they could not perform certain services for themselves. So the privileged had to perform these services. So if this happened, these privileged people had not many chances. Many of them actually left the Goan territory. Apparently, around 30% of local elites, of local people left. But 70% stayed there, no? And from this 70%, let's put it that way, 5% or, not more than 10% were the elites. And that state either converted or they would lose their status, and they pragmatically converted it. So it was not exactly a choice. They were, they were more or less obliged to convert, otherwise they would lose their positions and their ways of living. So, but in a way they preferred to lose. And that is very difficult to put it, but in a way they prefer to lose their cultural ways of living than their economic and social ways of living, even if they were very much interconnected,
Okay, yeah. So they rather keep their status and their money
and their devotion
than over their traditions and their religious beliefs.
Yes, exactly. Even if in the beginning they were convinced that the Portuguese would not stay longer, since the memory of the past they had, of the past rulers they had was that they had not stayed longer. So 40 years, Bijapur Sultanate, some other decades, Bahmani Sultanate, and others, Vijayanagar Empire. They had all reasons to believe that the Portuguese would not stay there for long.
Okay.
Also because they were external powers. They didn't know the land as the others did. But actually, for many different reasons, I'm not going to explore this now. They were trapped by history. I would put it that way because they probably believed that Portuguese would disappear in a moment or other, and so this pragmatic move in the beginning was a real trap for them, because even if they thought that this would not last long, actually it did last long. And so they were, their children were submitted to education, to learning the language, to all that stuff. And gradually the Portuguese really created a kind of westernized local society, or in different levels. Also, not all was so much westernized as others, but yes, but in 1720, theoretically, 90% of the population of Goa was Christian. So
Wow, it was successful.
At least nominally they were, but since the Portuguese rule lasted until 1961, I would say that they were quite successful. Yeah.
What about bloodshed? Was there a lot of bloodshed?
Yeah, bloodshed. Yes.
Torture.
Torture. You are speaking about Inquisition and all that.
Yeah, I mean, I Googled it and I saw some photos. I mean, artwork that was pretty gruesome.
Yeah, okay. There are also some mistakes about Inquisition circulating, I would say. But yes, but there was for sure. Well, Inquisition first was established because of the Jewish communities under the Portuguese rule in different cities of west coast of India, in the Malabar coast and Goa. There was Jewish people of Portuguese origin that had left Portugal, precisely because there were these rules against the Jewish people in Portugal, and many of them had settled down in these towns under Portuguese rule, or submitted to Portuguese rule, like Coxim, Cananur, and so on, and Goa. So Inquisition was established because of that. It was not established because of the local people, and that is the first important thing to say, because sometimes there are some people that believe that Inquisition was established because of the local people. It was not. But since it was contemporary, the conversion, systematic conversion of local people, the local people that were converted to Christianity and continued to practice local devotions and ritual practices and so on, they would be under the scrutiny of inquisitors. And then you can see a real big change from the end of the 16th century onwards. So if in the beginning you have this, what we call new Christians of Jewish origin, the main target, from the end of 16th century onwards, then the local people will be the main target, definitely. And yes, and there is violence. There is violence because I cannot say exactly the number, but many of them were burned at stake. So that is an awful thing, obviously. And they were tortured, many others, or these were tortured, and others were tortured but were not burned. So it was a real heavy hand against the people that were Christianized and were not Orthodox Christians, obviously. They could not be Orthodox Christians. So Inquisition had this was fixed in Orthodoxy, and had a very rigid understanding of what Orthodoxy was. So majority of population of Goa could not be Orthodox in 20 years or 30 years, of course. So they were always monitoring, controlling, and punishing those that were just what they considered that were deviants in relation to what was the Orthodoxy. But the Goan Inquisition did something else even that did not happen in any other Inquisition in the Portuguese kingdom, which was they were persecuting also non-Christians. So Inquisition theoretically could only persecute Christians. Wow. And non-Christians could not be persecuted. Because the mission of Inquisition was to guarantee Catholic orthodoxy. So non-Christians or not Catholics, they theoretically were not under the grip of Inquisition. But in the Goan case, there was this also a theoretical rule that some theologians defended and applied in Goa, that the local devotions and ritual practices were causing scandal, public scandal. And public scandal was something against the faith. So
public scandal is what, like a party or something?
Yes. Everything
temptation.
Yes, well, sati was certainly scandal, no? But sati had been prohibited very early in Goa. That had been prohibited, sati. But public scandal could be dances of dancers in the temples that were
religious ceremonies, weddings.
Yes, religious weddings, definitely, and many other things that were considered like witchery, because the Portuguese understood that as witchery, and things like that. All these could be considered public scandal. Also, for example, the weddings, local weddings, had many more people than the Portuguese weddings at that period. Many more people, many days of festivals and all that, and they would consider that public scandal. Also because compared to the Portuguese, it was really many more people, no? You see, like the local weddings could have 500 people, dure 3, 4 days, 5 days, while the Portuguese had maximum 100, and during one day. And this was unacceptable for colonizer power, that the colonizers had less ostentatious festivals for weddings than the colonized.
Yeah.
So they would consider that the local weddings were public scandal, and they would reduce the number of guests, saying no, local weddings can have only 30 guests, not more, and things like that, you know. So it was a huge legitimate ways, a huge how to put it, yes, a huge suppress of cultural practices that was really terrible, and also huge ways of legitimizing this suppression, you know. It was a constant and systematic ways of explaining why it was legitimate to suppress. So this was not arbitrary in the sense that some people decided to do it. No, it was, the people that decided to do it were legitimating that in legal terms, like always explaining that legally they could do it.
What happened to the material aspect of cultural, like books, statues, temples, and mosques? Were they all wiped out?
Yes, almost all. Well, some things just were escaped from being suppressed. Some deities were moved to different places in neighboring territories, and so some books was also escaped because some missionaries thought that they should read the books in order to understand better the local culture, to convert better the locals. But the main idea was again rooted in a deep conviction that if you destroyed the signs of the local culture, namely religious local culture, if the landscape changed completely, if the eyes were not seeing these signs, then they would be converted easily to Christianity. So there was this idea of substitution. So they would wipe out the local signs, religious signs, buildings, or statues, books, etc., and expelling the priests and all the officers of the temples. They should be expelled or converted to Christianity, and then substitute this by churches, by Portuguese missionaries and priests, by Portuguese saints, holy images, and so forth. And there was again this philosophical belief that since the eyes were the first way of knowing, or the first sense,
the eyes.
The eyes. So if the eyes didn't see, so the intelligence also would not have information to operate with,
Yeah.
So there was this idea that they would be able to, how to say, I don't know how to say it, to take out the roots. I don't know the verb in English for that.
To pluck out the roots. To take out the roots.
The cultural roots, the local cultural.
So basically, if you take out all the things that look like a different religion than Catholicism, then because the eyes are the first window to knowledge, and if they don't see that, then you're taking away the first layer of the local religious and traditions, and that'll make it easier to convert them if they only see churches and Christ and the cross and Jesus.
Exactly. That was the initial and the ingenuous belief, obviously. That was very naive belief, because then they were started to realize that this did not happen. Of course, that memory doesn't work like that. It's not that just one thing and put another. And they started to say things about the locals, saying, we have never seen people like this so much attached to their ancestors and to the beliefs of their ancestors and so on. It's it's impossible to deal with this because they realize, obviously, and then they even would say, when they look at the Virgin Mary, they are seeing their goddesses. Well, there are frequent references to this kind of thing. But so there was this enormous, again, cultural violence in the beginning of in the mid 16th century. So in these central territories of Goa again. So we are talking again of the central territories of Goa, and not the ones that have been annexed after the second half of the 18th century, because these policies did not apply to the other territories. So, but in the central territories, yes, between 1541, 1567, more or less, unfortunately, all the temples had been demolished, the books burned, and it was an awful loss for the local society.
Right. What happens when they realize that that's not working? Then they move on to violence?
When they realized that it was not working, First Inquisition became more and more attentive to these people, of course. And they were using, because then there was this, they realized that there was a difference on what was happening in the, well, we can call public sphere outside the doors of the houses. And there the locals were much more careful to not perform what was against the new rules. But then they realized that inside doors, locals continue to perform the right and the usual practices. So they start to get into houses also to look what was going on, and in order to take people to prison if necessary, if they were finding them performing the cults they were forbidden from in the context of the Portuguese law to practice. So yes, there was this intensive ways of trying to control all these performances. But again, there was, but at the same time, there was, and the lists of inquisitions show that lots of people were under the scrutiny. But on the other hand, in 1736, the same Inquisition publishes an edict with the rituals that were still kept by the local Christians. And you have an enormous list of rituals and rites that the Inquisition was unable, and the missionaries were unable to control or to change. So there were always margins of keeping traditions, even if the violence was really strong and imposing. The truth is that still today, in these regions that were more Christianized, you have lots of people that are Christians and still perform some of these rites. So,
what are the? Can you give examples of these rites?
Yes, I can give you an example. In wedding rites, for example, wedding rites in the beginning, in the 16th century, well, still also today in India, in Hindu marriages, you have at least two parties, one in the groom house and one in the bride's house.
Yes.
And that continued to happen. I don't know if it happens today in Goa, but my parents were married in Goa, and they come from Catholic families, and so they had these two moments in their weddings. So it was a Catholic wedding, but there was a party in the house of the groom, and there was a party in the house of the house of my father, and then a party in the house of my mother. And also, if you go to Goa, the Catholic weddings have many more people. Well, have hundreds of people, or even more than 1,000 people, than any marriage in Portugal. Only, how to put it? Well, only the very, very, very rich people will have hundreds of people in their wedding. But in Goa, it's not only the very, very rich people. It's a common trait in weddings. So this is one of these practices that really persisted against the grain, against the rules. And even if there were impositions against it, people continued to practice.
Wow.
That's an example, but I could give other examples that still happen, like the shrines, the Catholic shrines in Goan houses. Well, the form of the shrine or the organization of the shrine reminds much more of a Hindu shrine than,
Wow, that's cool.
Yes, there is a superimposition of many Christian saints, and it's really amazing to see it. This logic of accumulation that I was speaking before, now it is transposed to the Catholic belief and practice. So you can see in many different ways the persistence of cultural traits that come from the past. Yes, many people are completely unaware this is a trait of the past. They are completely unaware of it, but and they would even well, the Catholics in Goa that are the real genuine Catholics, very asserted about their Catholicism. I think some of them would even be shocked if they knew these were traits of an ancient Hindu past.
Do Goan Catholics consider themselves Portuguese, or do they consider themselves Indian?
Depends on the generation. I mean, I would say that today they more than Indian, they would consider themselves Goan.
We were talking about how the Portuguese were wiping out churches and wiping out temples and books and things like that. I read somewhere that the caste system wasn't wiped out, and they kept the caste system and allowed it to steep into Christianity of these new converts. So that remained. Is that true?
It is true, and it is another what I call historical trap, because I was telling you before that the first people to convert in Goa, in the territories of Goa, were unprivileged people.
Unprivileged.
The first to convert.
Okay.
And the Christian creed, is about human dignity and equality.
Right.
So I don't know, because I was not there in the 16th century, but I can imagine that if you persuade unprivileged people to convert because they are going to be more dignified or even equal to others, that can be very attractive for these people. No? So the problem was that, so I would say that many of these people that converted pragmatically and not by imposition, they did it because they thought about Christianity as a way of social mobility also.
Right, makes sense.
And also to escape to their miserable condition. We can see that with women in particular, what is interesting. Because women under the Portuguese law, because when they converted, they would become like Portuguese, no? They would be under Portuguese law. So women under Portuguese law would be much more benefited than women under the local law. They, for example, they could inherit, widows could remarry and become landowners and things like that. So we can see that there are actually also a pragmatic conversion of women to what is a very interesting feature in the case of Goa, a conversion in Goa. This we have many historical documents where we see the agency of women in the 16th, 17th century in local villages and so. But to convert the elites, then the Portuguese allow the caste system to continue. They in the documentation they say, yes, we should allow them to keep their honors because otherwise they don't convert. What happens with that? Basically, that's the expectations of the unprivileged would not going to be fulfilled in the end. Even if in the beginning they could expect social mobility or becoming like equals or so forth, after the moment when the elites convert and they keep their honors or their castes, that's what they mean by that, then the caste system continues to operate as it operated in Goa in that period, which is not so rigid as it operated later,
right,
in the 18th and 19th century. But still, so you can see that in one century, the possibilities of life of unprivileged people just change dramatically because they can believe that they would become better off. And then when the elites convert, in a way, they somehow go back to their initial social position.
Yikes. Okay, I see. And it's very important for the elites to convert in order to colonize this region, because the elites are, I guess, key to all of Goa.
I would say it's not all of Goa. It's in many places. I'm not sure whether we cannot generalize about imperial rule or authoritarian rule, but it's difficult for imperial rules and authoritarian rules to really implement themselves and continue without any kind of acceptance of the local elites. Because especially external imperial rules, no? Because the elites are the ones that really know the land and how it operates. And
Right. And have influence?
Yes, their influence, and they in the majority of these places, the systems are already hierarchical, so they have many dependents and all that stuff. So it's much easier in a way to control the elites, to control the territory, than to control unprivileged people that don't have so much power. And when I mean power, it's power in different ways, not only political power, it's power of influence, status, cultural power, etc., no? And yes, so I think I would, well, in the case of Goa for sure, but I would say that's not only in the case of Goa. It's the agency of the elites is fundamental to conserve colonial rule. The agency of local elites.
Local elites. So today, do Goans look at churches and do they look at priests and missionaries as a legacy, not a legacy, as a tool of colonialism, as a vessel of colonialism, or has all that been forgotten and people are now practicing the religion for the sake of their own choices? Does that make sense?
That makes sense for Catholics, yes. I think that Catholics in Goa today, they go to churches and they are religiously intense and connected because they are genuinely Christian, even if it's many times it's what is called Indian Christianity, because it's not like in Italy or in Portugal or other places. But yes, I don't think that the majority of Goan Catholics of Goa today think about colonialism when they go to the church.
Okay.
But the majority of population of Goa of today are not Christians.
Right.
So it's 25% of population of Goa that is Christian. So 75%, I don't know if they think all the time this is colonialism. I don't think so. But yes, if you would ask them this question, probably they would say, yes, this is a sign of Portuguese colonialism.
You have another book called Catholic Orientalism.
Yes. Can I say 3 words of this book?
Take as long as you want.
Okay, so this book, Catholic Orientalism, is called, and the subtitle is Portuguese Empire, Indian Knowledge. It has many goals, and one of it, the name Catholic Orientalism had been chosen precisely to distinguish it from the classical Orientalism that we heard of, the British Orientalism, French Orientalism, and which are mainly from the late 18th century, 19th and 20th century. So, and this book is about 16th and up to 18th century. And it's called Catholic because it's about knowledge produced in the context of Catholic empires. Okay?
Right.
or Catholic imperial presence in India. In this case, the Portuguese presence, but also the French presence in South India. And its argument, it's one of its arguments is that classical Orientalism used lots of the knowledge produced under the Catholic rules, but they didn't, how to put it, they didn't identify that knowledge as if it had been produced under Catholics, because in the turn of the 18th to 19th century, there is, as you know, this process of secularization and separation of religion and politics, at least theoretically, and also of religion and knowledge and rational knowledge. So in Europe, there is this belief that knowledge produced in the context of religion is not exactly knowledge. It's not exactly, or at least it's not scientific knowledge. And so this body of knowledge was somehow dismissed as lower type of knowledge, but at the same time it was used by the people that was saying that they were not religious, and so there is this kind of trap. Well, I like very much this
the word trap.
Traps. No, historical traps, because they bring us to a more essential question and critical question: is that people don't forecast the future.
Right.
So when people take decisions, they take more or less rational decisions, thinking about what they think that future will be, but they don't forecast the future. So these people were producing knowledge about India, but they would never imagine that one day British and French would say, "Oh, this is less than knowledge. We don't consider it, or at least we don't consider that their authors should be valued as scientists or experts on India, you know."
Yeah.
So in that sense, there was this kind of historical trap. So the knowledge regimes changed, and so this body of work either became forgotten, and part of it became just forgotten, and we tried just to recover some of this knowledge, and other was not forgotten, but was dissolved, maybe it's the word, dissolved in knowledge produced in the 19th and 20th century. So what we tried to do in this book is to either two things: recover what has been really forgotten, and also to show the itineraries of knowledge from this 16th century until the 19th, and how some of this knowledge produced under these Catholic rules has been integrated by the knowledge in the 19th and 20th century, or also has been deposited in British libraries, German libraries, French libraries, and therefore used by scholars of these regions, and not from the ones that had produced it, you know,
Right.
this kind of problem of archives. And so that's one of the goals. And
What
the
kind
other
of-
goal,
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, the other goal is, that's why we call Indian knowledge, Portuguese Empire Indian knowledge. And by Indian knowledge, we mean knowledge of India or about India, but also knowledge produced by Indians.
Right.
Because the same thing that happened to like Catholic administrators, missionaries, agents of European origin that had collected knowledge about India, they did exactly the same in general concerning their Indian partners, because many of these, lots of this knowledge have been co-produced with Indians. So, but these Indians are also dismissed in the Catholic narrative. So you have a kind of double dismissing of the Indians that have been producing also this knowledge, and then the Catholic knowledge dismissed by the people that was thinking about themselves as being secular and non-religious, like the British and the French in the 19th century.
So we get like a whole different perspective of history that we never got to see before.
Well, I think that's what historians should do, no?
Yeah.
It's to bring new perspectives and help us to complexify our images about the past. So it's what we were trying to do with this book.
Sounds very interesting. Thank you so much. This was such a pleasure and honor to hear you talk.
Thank you, and wishing you all the best in this great podcast. And
thank you so much.